July 2, 2009. What would you do if the night around you suddenly started breathing? If the Afghan desert went silent, the radios crackled with a whisper of panic. And somewhere in the black fields of corn, a wounded Marine was screaming for a medic while Taliban fighters crept closer in the dark. That question slammed into thousands of US Marines as the massive offensive known as Operation Khanjar erupted across the river valleys of Helmand Province, one of the largest air assaults since Vietnam. When helicopters thundered through the night carrying more than 4,000 Marines from the United States Marine Corps into territory that had been under Taliban control for years. And the mission sounded simple on paper: push deep into insurgent strongholds, secure villages along the Helmand River, and give civilians a chance to breathe again. But nothing about Helmand was simple, because the moment those helicopters touched the dusty landing zones before dawn, the war revealed its teeth. Marines stepped into fields rigged with hidden explosives, irrigation canals that concealed ambush teams, and compounds where every doorway might hide a rifle barrel. And the silence of the countryside felt wrong, like the land itself was waiting for something terrible to begin. And it didn't take long. Only hours after the first waves landed near towns like Noah and Garmsir, scattered gunfire cracked across the farmland. Taliban fighters melting out of tree lines and mud walls, probing the Marines' positions, testing their nerves. And in one patrol moving along a narrow canal bank that same morning, a squad suddenly heard the sound every soldier dreads most in Afghanistan: a dull metallic snap under a boot, followed by an explosion that ripped through the quiet fields, throwing dirt, smoke, and pieces of equipment into the air. And when the dust settled, a young Marine lay screaming on the ground, his leg shredded by an improvised explosive device, the most feared weapon of the Afghan war. And that's when the call burst across the radio: "Corpsman up! Medic!" The words every combat medic knows mean run toward the worst place imaginable. The Navy corpsman attached to the unit sprinted forward under fire, bullets snapping through corn stalks around him as Taliban fighters began firing from distant compounds. And what happened next became one of those moments Marines never forget. Because the medic didn't slow down, didn't dive for cover. He slid beside the wounded Marine in the open dirt and started working. Hands moving fast, tourniquet tight, morphine ready. Voice calm even while rounds cracked overhead, and one Marine later said it felt surreal. Like time slowed down and the entire battlefield shrank to that one desperate patch of ground where a life was hanging by a thread. But the horror of Helmand had another layer, something many veterans still talk about years later. Because the Taliban knew exactly how Marines reacted to wounded comrades. And sometimes they waited for that moment, watching through rifle scopes until the medic arrived, then opening fire again, hoping to turn a rescue into a massacre. And during those early days of Operation Khanjar, several patrols reported exactly that chilling pattern: an explosion, a wounded man, then gunfire erupting from hidden positions as Marines rushed to help. And the fear it created was almost primal, because every step through those fields felt like walking into an invisible trap. Every irrigation ditch could hide a bomb, every doorway might conceal a rifle. And yet the Marines kept pushing forward village by village because the mission demanded it. Helicopters roared overhead delivering supplies, drones circled silently in the sky, and platoons moved through narrow dirt paths between compounds, where children sometimes waved one moment and gunfire erupted the next. The strange duality of counterinsurgency warfare, where danger could hide behind the most ordinary scenes. And one Marine joked darkly during a lull in fighting, "Man, this place looks peaceful," which means we're probably about 5 minutes from something exploding. A line that made the squad laugh for half a second before the tension crept back in. But the most haunting stories from Operation Khanjar often came from night patrols. Because Helmand after dark felt like another world entirely. The farmland swallowed by shadows, dogs barking in distant villages. Marines moving slowly under night vision goggles that painted everything ghostly green. And more than once patrols reported hearing footsteps or whispers in the fields before suddenly realizing they were surrounded by Taliban fighters creeping closer in the darkness. Sometimes just yards away, a nerve-shredding game of cat and mouse where the first side to spot movement usually survived. And one squad leader later described the moment that still raised goosebumps on his arms during a patrol near Nawa. The Marines halted after hearing rustling in the crops. Rifles up, scanning the darkness, and for a long second nothing moved. Then a figure suddenly stood up only 20 feet away, holding in a K-47, as if he had risen straight out of the earth. And the quiet field erupted in muzzle flashes so bright they burned through the night vision goggles. A firefight that lasted less than a minute, but felt like an hour, leaving behind empty brass, shattered plants, and the eerie silence that always followed violence in Helmand. Yet despite the fear and chaos, Operation Khanjar slowly began shifting control of the region. Marines establishing patrol bases inside villages that had not seen coalition forces in years, meeting local elders, clearing roads of bombs, and trying to convince civilians the Taliban grip was weakening. But the cost was real. The offensive saw some of the fiercest fighting of the summer of 2009. And every patrol carried the knowledge that the next step could trigger an explosion. Because Helmand was one of the most heavily mined battlefields of the entire Afghan war. Still, stories of courage kept spreading through the ranks, especially about medics who ran into fire again and again, patching up wounded Marines in the dust, sometimes cracking dark jokes to keep spirits alive. One corpsman reportedly telling a badly shaken Marine, "Hey buddy, don't die on me. I just filled out the paperwork," which somehow made everyone laugh, even while helicopters were inbound for evacuation. That strange mix of horror, heroism, and gallows humor became the heartbeat of Operation Khanjar. A campaign fought not just with weapons, but with grit, exhaustion, and loyalty to the person standing beside you. And by late summer, many villages along the Helmand River had shifted away from Taliban control, something that seemed impossible just weeks earlier when the first helicopters roared across the desert sky. Yet even after the firefights ended, the memories stuck with the Marines who were there. The sound of rotor blades at dawn, the sudden blast of hidden bombs, the terrifying silence before an ambush, and the unforgettable sight of a medic kneeling beside a wounded Marine while bullets snapped through the air, refusing to move until the job was done. Moments that defined the brutal reality of Operation Khanjar and the kind of courage war demands from ordinary people thrown into extraordinary danger. And it leaves one haunting question that veterans still ask themselves, and that I want you to think about too. If you were standing in that dusty Helmand field on July 2, 2009, hearing the cry, "Medic," while gunfire cracked around you in the dark, would you have run forward into the horror like they did? Or frozen in place? Let me know what you think, and if a moment in this story hit you hard, share it with someone who needs to hear what courage really looks like.